Deadwood's $1 bride, the gunslinger, the stolen gold, and the bloodbath that shook the town of Deadwood was nothing like most towns in the West. It was loud, wild, and always filled with dust that clung to every coat and hat. Wooden buildings leaned at odd angles, their paint worn and faded, and the streets were a jumble of mud, broken carts, and people rushing to make their fortunes in the goldfields nearby. The sun was just rising when a lone rider appeared on the horizon. His horse was tired and thin, but it moved steadily, kicking up clouds of brown dust as they approached the town. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and a long coat that had seen better days. His face was shadowed by the wide brim of a worn hat, and a faint scar ran across his cheek. The gunslinger, as people would later call him, had a reputation that traveled faster than the wind. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, but there was a danger in the way he moved. Every step, every glance, spoke of a man who had survived fights, betrayals, and death. He was not a man to cross lightly. As he rode down the main street, people paused to stare. Merchants behind wooden counters peeked out of saloon windows. Children playing in the dirt froze mid-step. Some whispered, "That's him," while others tried to remember if they had ever seen a gunfighter with such cold eyes. The gunslinger did not speak to anyone. His eyes scanned the buildings and the people, always calculating, always alert. He was looking for someone, or something, and nothing else mattered. A few steps behind him, a young woman stepped out from the shadows of a narrow alley. She was small and fragile-looking, but her eyes held a sharpness that made her seem older than her years. She wore a simple dress that had been patched many times, and her hair was tied back tightly. The bride, as she was called in the whispers of the town, had come to Deadwood out of desperation. Her family was gone, and she had nowhere else to go. She had agreed to marry a man for $1, a decision that made some people shake their heads in judgment, but she saw it as a chance to survive. The town was not kind to strangers, especially women alone. The bride knew this, and she had learned to keep her head down, to watch and wait. She had heard about the gunslinger before he arrived, about the man with a deadly skill for finding gold and settling debts with bullets. Their meeting was not by chance. She needed protection, and he needed information. Their paths were destined to cross, though neither knew what the other would demand of them. Inside the saloon, the smell of whiskey, smoke, and sweat hung heavy in the air. Miners talked loudly, slamming their fists on tables as they counted gold dust or boasted about the claims they had staked. Card games were in full swing, with the occasional shout when a player lost everything or tried to cheat. The gunslinger pushed the doors open, and the noise seemed to drop for a moment. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and whispers spread like wildfire. He did not pause at the bar. He did not greet anyone. Instead, he made his way to a quiet corner where the shadows were thickest. The bride watched from across the room. She had been hired to deliver a message, but her role was more dangerous than she had imagined. She knew she had to gain the gunslinger's trust without showing weakness. She moved carefully, her footsteps light against the wooden floor, until she reached the table where he sat. "You're looking for something," she said softly, barely above a whisper. The gunslinger's eyes flicked toward her. He said nothing at first, studying her face, trying to see if she was a threat. Then he nodded slightly, signaling her to continue. "The gold," she said. "The stolen gold. I know who has it. But you need to be careful. This town, it doesn't forgive mistakes." He leaned back, his hand brushing the gun at his hip. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "I need protection," she said honestly. "And maybe, maybe you need someone who knows the town better than you do. Deadwood is not kind to outsiders, and neither is the gold. The gunslinger considered her words. He had come to Deadwood for the gold, but he had also come for answers. Every town he entered carried the same danger: men who would kill for silver and women who would lie to survive. Yet there was something in her eyes, a mixture of fear and courage, that made him think she could be useful. "All right," he said finally. "We work together, for now. But one mistake." His voice trailed off, but the threat was clear. The bride nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. She had lived long enough to know that in Deadwood, one mistake could mean death. Outside, the streets continued to bustle with the chaos of gold seekers. Horses clopped over the uneven boards, merchants shouted prices, and stray dogs ran through the alleys scavenging for scraps. The gunslinger and the bride stepped out together, moving carefully through the crowds. He scanned every face, every shadow as they walked, while she pointed out places to avoid and people to watch. The town seemed alive with danger. In one corner, two men argued violently over a claim. In another, a group of miners laughed as they tossed gold dust from one hand to another, unaware of the eyes watching them. Deadwood was a place where fortunes could be made in a single day and lives could be lost in the same instant. As the day wore on, the gunslinger and the bride visited the saloons, the stables, and even the back alleys where deals were made in whispers. She introduced him to people who knew more about the stolen gold. Men and women who had kept secrets for years. Each conversation brought them closer to understanding the danger that surrounded them, and each step reminded them that in Deadwood, trust was as rare as water in the desert. By evening, the town had grown even wilder. Lanterns flickered along the streets, casting long shadows that danced with the movement of people. The gunslinger and the bride found a quiet inn to rest, though neither fully trusted that it would be safe. They shared a simple meal, speaking in low tones about what they had learned and what they feared. "You think we can find it?" the bride asked quietly, glancing at him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that whoever took it will not stop until they have everything, and neither will we." Outside the window, Deadwood continued its noisy life, indifferent to the plans of two strangers trying to survive in a town ruled by gold and gunfire. The night was long, and danger was close. But for the first time since arriving, the gunslinger felt a flicker of hope, not because of the gold, but because of the woman who had stepped into his life, someone who might just survive alongside him. In Deadwood, every sunrise brought new chaos, but this sunrise, the gunslinger and the bride had taken the first step together, entering a story that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their will to survive. They did not know what awaited them. But one thing was certain: Deadwood would never be the same again. The next morning, Deadwood woke with the sound of hammers, horses, and shouting men. Dust rose from the streets, catching the sunlight in a golden haze. The gunslinger and the bride stepped outside, ready to continue their search for the stolen gold. Their first stop was the heart of the town, where rumors moved faster than bullets. The bride led him to a small market square where merchants sold tools, clothes, and food. The people here were different from the miners and gamblers in the saloon. They were careful, their eyes always moving, as if waiting for trouble to appear. She whispered names of people who knew things about the gold and explained who could be trusted. "There's a man named Rigg," she said. "He knows a lot about the shipments coming in from the mines. If anyone knows about the gold, it's him. But he is cautious. He doesn't talk to strangers." The gunslinger nodded. "Then we don't need to be strangers." He adjusted his coat and moved toward the man's stall. Rigg was older, with sun-weathered skin and hands that were rough from years of labor. His eyes narrowed when he saw the gunslinger, but he did not speak immediately. I hear you know about some gold that went missing, the gunslinger said quietly, keeping his voice calm but firm. I want to know where it is. Rig glanced around the busy market, then leaned closer. Maybe I do, he said. But you have to understand, Deadwood is not kind to men who ask too many questions. People will shoot first and think later. The bride stepped forward. We are not here to cause trouble, she said. We only want the truth. We have reasons to find it. Rig studied her, then the gunslinger, and finally nodded. There is a man called Collins. He's been moving gold around, hiding it in the town. Dangerous man, but clever. If you want it, you need to watch your back. He has friends everywhere. The gunslinger thanked Rig and left the stall. The bride followed, her mind racing. Collins was a problem, not just because he had the gold, but because he was unpredictable. The gunslinger was used to danger, but the bride had to rely on her instincts more than anything. As they walked through Deadwood, the streets seemed to grow darker despite the morning sun. The town had a way of changing quickly, of hiding secrets in plain sight. People laughed and shouted, but there were eyes watching from every doorway, every window. Deadwood did not forgive mistakes. One wrong step could end a life, and the bride remembered that with every cautious move she made. Later that day, they visited a small inn at the edge of town. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but it had the right kind of people for asking questions without attracting attention. Inside, miners and travelers talked quietly, their words filled with the excitement and fear of the gold rush. The gunslinger and the bride found a table in the corner. The bride lowered her voice. Collins is smart, she said. He never keeps the gold in one place. If we want to find it, we need to follow him, see where he moves. The gunslinger nodded. Then we need to watch everyone around him. In Deadwood, even friends can turn enemies in a second. As the afternoon wore on, the town grew louder. Outside, men argued over claims and women called to each other across the street. The gunslinger noticed a man watching them from a distance. He had a slim build and sharp eyes, and his hand rested near the gun at his hip. That's him, the gunslinger said quietly to the bride. He's following us. We need to be careful. The bride's heart beat faster. She had seen many dangers in Deadwood, but the feeling of being followed was worse than anything else. She had to stay calm, to think quickly, because one wrong move could put them both in serious trouble. They ducked into a narrow alley, moving silently among the barrels and crates. The follower hesitated at the entrance, unsure if he had lost them. The gunslinger and the bride used the confusion to their advantage, slipping past him and continuing toward the outskirts of town. By evening, they reached the edge of Deadwood, where the land opened into hills and scrubby forests. The gunslinger set up a small camp while the bride gathered water and checked their surroundings. She was careful, knowing that any noise could draw attention. I don't like this, she said softly. Collins is too smart. He might have others watching us right now. He probably does, the gunslinger replied. But we have to move. If we wait too long, the gold disappears, and with it any chance of catching him. Night fell and the stars shone bright above the quiet hills. The gunslinger and the bride sat by the fire, talking in whispers about the plan. They would need to split tasks. He would watch the paths and trails while she tried to gather information from anyone who might be connected to Collins. Over the next few days, they moved carefully through Deadwood. The gunslinger's sharp eyes noticed every detail, the way men exchanged nods, the hidden signals in the saloons, and the rumors that moved faster than truth. The bride, meanwhile, learned to blend in, asking questions without giving away too much. She discovered that Collins had been sending gold to a secret location outside town, a place where he thought no one would follow. One evening, the bride returned to the gunslinger with news. "I know where he's sending it," she said, showing him a rough map she had drawn from what she learned. "But it's dangerous. The path is watched, and he has men waiting." The gunslinger studied the map. "Then we plan carefully. No mistakes. We go at first light." For the first time since arriving in Deadwood, the bride felt a small spark of hope. She and the gunslinger were working together, and together they might be able to succeed where others had failed. Yet, the town around them remained unpredictable. Every friendly face could hide a threat, and every shadow might conceal danger. As they prepared for the next day, the bride thought about how far she had come. From a desperate woman agreeing to a $1 marriage, she had become someone who could stand beside a gunslinger, someone who could face danger with courage. Deadwood had tested her, but it had also given her purpose. The gunslinger watched the bride quietly, noticing her growth and determination. He had seen many people come and go in Deadwood, many with courage that faded under pressure. But there was something different about her. She was clever, brave, and resourceful. If they were to survive what was coming, they would need each other more than ever. That night, the town of Deadwood slept uneasily. The saloons had closed, but the streets remained alive with shadows and whispers. The stolen gold was still out there, and the people who wanted it were close behind. The gunslinger and the bride lay by their small fire, thinking about the dangers that awaited them at first light. Deadwood had already tested their courage, and the days ahead would test them even more. But for now, they had each other, and in a town ruled by greed, violence, and secrets, that was a strength neither of them could afford to underestimate. As the fire burned low, the gunslinger and the bride silently promised themselves that they would face whatever came next. They did not know if they would survive, but they knew they would try. And in Deadwood, that might be the only choice that mattered. The morning fog hung thick over Deadwood, softening the edges of the buildings, but not the danger that lingered in the streets. The gunslinger and the bride moved quietly, sticking to shadows, their eyes alert for any sign of Collins or his men. The town seemed peaceful at first, but both knew that in Deadwood, calm could vanish in a heartbeat. They had a plan. At first light, they would follow Collins' trail to the hidden location where he was keeping the stolen gold. But as the gunslinger had predicted, Collins was not careless. Someone was always watching, and Deadwood had a way of letting whispers travel fast, especially about valuable gold. The bride led the gunslinger down a narrow alley behind the saloon. "He came through here yesterday," she whispered. "A man in a brown coat, tall, moving quickly. I think he knows we're watching." The gunslinger nodded. His hand rested lightly on the gun at his hip, though he did not draw it. There was no need yet, but the warning was clear. Deadwood had a way of testing patience, and patience could mean the difference between life and death. They followed the alley toward the edge of town, careful not to be seen. Collins's path led toward an abandoned warehouse near the creek. Broken windows and rotting wood marked the building as empty, but they both knew that appearances in Deadwood were never what they seemed. The bride peeked through a crack in the door. Inside, crates were stacked high, and a few men moved quietly, carrying sacks and whispering to one another. Gold. They were handling it even now. The gunslinger studied the men silently. 2 guards at the door, 3 inside. No sign of Collins yet. He's clever. He's probably watching from above. The bride nodded. We need a plan. If we rush in, they'll shoot. If we wait, someone might alert him. The gunslinger thought for a moment. We create A distraction. Something small, enough to draw the guards outside. Then we move in quietly. The bride hesitated but agreed. She remembered the warnings of Deadwood. The town did not forgive mistakes, and gold had a way of bringing trouble faster than fire spreads through dry grass. Together, they found a pile of loose boards nearby and tossed one into the street. The sound echoed through the empty alley, drawing the guards' attention immediately. One guard stepped outside, muttering curses. Another followed, leaving the warehouse mostly unguarded. The gunslinger moved with swift precision, his long coat brushing the floor as he slipped inside. The bride followed, her heart pounding, each step measured and careful. Inside, the warehouse smelled of old wood, metal, and sweat. The men handling the gold were too focused on their task to notice the intruders at first. The gunslinger gestured to the bride to stay low. Together, they crept toward the crates, examining their contents. Bags of gold coins and dust filled the air with a metallic scent. Suddenly, a shout rang out. One of the men had noticed a shadow, and chaos erupted. The gunslinger reacted immediately, grabbing the nearest man and tossing him aside. The bride ducked behind a crate, her hands shaking, but she moved with determination, helping to block the men from advancing. Shots were fired. The sound echoed through the warehouse and out into the streets, waking Deadwood fully. People ran from their homes, merchants bolted doors, and children huddled inside, scared by the gunfire. The bloodbath had begun, though neither the gunslinger nor the bride expected how violent it would become. The gunslinger moved like a shadow, precise and deliberate, avoiding unnecessary harm but stopping anyone who tried to escape with the gold. The bride realized that she had to act too. She grabbed a lantern, swinging it to startle the men, giving the gunslinger a chance to gain control. Her courage surprised even herself, and she felt a strange thrill mixed with fear. One of the men lunged at her, and she barely managed to sidestep him, knocking over a crate in the process. The crash caused several more men to stumble, and in the confusion, the gunslinger moved quickly, taking control of the room. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the warehouse fell silent. The guards outside had returned, but the chaos had scattered most of the men. The gunslinger and the bride gathered the gold they could and prepared to leave. Yet, as they stepped toward the exit, the sound of boots on the roof made them pause. Collins. He had been watching from above all along. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with anger and fear. He shouted at his men, trying to rally them, but the damage had been done. The gunslinger and the bride moved fast, slipping out the back and disappearing into the alleys before Collins could react. Outside, the streets of Deadwood were filled with the aftermath. Merchants shouted about the stolen gold, neighbors whispered about the gunfire, and people tried to understand what had just happened. The town was shaken, and news of the bloodbath spread quickly. The gunslinger and the bride made their way to a safe spot on the hills outside town. They were both exhausted, their hands and faces dirty, but there was a sense of relief. They had survived, and they had taken control of what they could. "Are you hurt?" the gunslinger asked. "I'm fine," the bride said, though her hands were still trembling. "I didn't expect it to be that violent." The gunslinger nodded. Deadwood doesn't care about expectations. Only survival matters here. They set up a small camp for the night, sitting silently under the stars. The gold they had taken was small compared to what Collins had hidden, but it was a start. More importantly, they had learned that Collins was clever, but he could be outsmarted. The bride looked at him, her face reflecting both fear and determination. "We have to keep going," she said. "He won't stop, and neither can we." The gunslinger studied the dark outline of Deadwood in the distance. "He's dangerous," he said softly, "but we are not helpless. We move carefully, and we make our own rules." Over the next few days, they worked cautiously. The town felt different after the bloodshed. People avoided certain streets, whispers carried fear, and the saloons had quieter faces than before. The gunslinger and the bride moved through Deadwood like shadows, gathering information, making allies where they could, and preparing for the next move. The bride learned quickly how to blend in, how to speak to the right people without drawing attention. The gunslinger watched her progress with quiet approval. She was no longer just a woman seeking protection. She was becoming a partner, someone who could face the dangers of Deadwood alongside him. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, they discovered that Collins had a secret route out of town, a narrow canyon hidden from casual view, where he could transport gold and escape unnoticed. This knowledge was valuable, but it came with risk. If Collins realized they knew, the next encounter would be even more dangerous. "We follow him carefully," the gunslinger said. "No mistakes. Deadwood has already taken too much from people who made one wrong step." The bride nodded, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. This town had tested her courage, and now it demanded more. But she knew she was ready. She had survived so far, and she would continue to survive no matter what Collins or anyone else tried to do. The night fell quietly, but Deadwood was never truly quiet. The streets held secrets, the buildings hid danger, and the shadows moved with life of their own. The gunslinger and the bride sat by their small fire, preparing for the day when they would confront Collins again. They did not know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: the bloodbath in the warehouse had changed everything. Deadwood had seen violence before, but the events of this day would be remembered, and the gunslinger and the bride had stepped into a story that was far from over. They had survived, but survival was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come, and Deadwood would test them again, in ways neither could fully imagine. The day broke slowly over Deadwood, and the town seemed almost peaceful compared to the chaos of the warehouse bloodbath. The gunslinger and the bride watched from a small hill just outside town, studying the movements below. Collins had not yet appeared, but they knew he was aware of their presence. The gold, or at least part of it, was still hidden somewhere in town, and the two of them had only a limited window to act. The bride scanned the streets through the dust-filled morning air. "He's clever," she whispered. "He's been moving around, checking the streets. I think he suspects we know about the canyon route." The gunslinger nodded. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, but he did not draw it. Patience was as important as speed. "Then we use that," he said. "We don't rush. We let him make the first mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready." They spent the morning observing Collins's men. They were sloppy, overconfident, and predictable. One carried a satchel that looked heavy with gold, while another frequently glanced toward a narrow alley that could lead to the canyon. Every movement told a story. Every glance revealed a plan. The gunslinger and the bride were careful not to show themselves, but they noted every detail, memorizing patterns and preparing for the confrontation that was coming. By midday, the streets of Deadwood were crowded with townspeople going about their business. Merchants called out prices, children ran after stray dogs, and miners shouted about the recent finds. The gunslinger and the bride moved carefully among them, blending in, observing, and avoiding detection. Collins's men were moving as well, and the tension built with each passing hour. The bride leaned closer to the gunslinger. "I think we can catch him at the creek," she said. "He has to move the gold through there to get it out of town. If we wait there, we can see everything. The gunslinger studied the map she had drawn. It's risky, he said, but we have no choice. If he knows we're watching, he'll vanish, and the gold will disappear. We take the chance carefully. They followed the narrow path to the creek, hidden behind bushes and rocks. The water glistened in the sunlight, and the sound of it moving over stones filled the air. Collins's men appeared soon after, carrying a small cart filled with bags of gold. The gunslinger and the bride stayed hidden, watching their every step. Suddenly, one of Collins's men tripped on a root, dropping a bag of gold into the creek. Coins spilled into the water, glittering in the sunlight. Collins shouted, furious, and the commotion drew attention from the others. The gunslinger seized the opportunity. He stepped out from behind a rock, his hand on the gun, his voice calm but commanding. Stop right there. His men turned, eyes wide with fear. The gunslinger had the advantage, but he did not want unnecessary bloodshed. Leave the gold, he said, and no one needs to get hurt. The bride stepped out beside him. We know where your secret route is, she added. We've been following you. You can stop this now or it will get worse. Collins's face twisted with anger. He realized the plan had failed. You don't understand, he shouted. This gold, it's mine. The gunslinger shook his head slowly. It's not yours, not anymore. Deadwood has seen enough blood over it already. Collins's men hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. The gunslinger kept his eyes on each of them, ready for any sudden movement. The bride's presence added strength. She had proven herself capable and courageous, and Collins seemed unsettled by her confidence. The tension hung in the air, heavy and electric. One wrong move could start another bloodbath. Collins took a step forward, then froze. The gunslinger's hand twitched, ready to draw if needed. But instead of firing, he lowered his arm slightly, showing control. The bride, too, stayed calm, her eyes fixed on Collins, daring him to make a mistake. After a tense moment, Collins backed down. He gestured to his men, signaling them to retreat. The bags of gold were left behind, and they vanished into the woods beyond the creek. The gunslinger and the bride approached cautiously, collecting the gold and ensuring that no traps were left behind. The bride let out a small breath. That was close, she said. Too close. The gunslinger nodded. Deadwood is full of close calls, he said. But we're still here, and we have what we came for now. They moved quickly, taking the gold to a safer location outside town. Along the way, they discussed their next steps. They knew Collins would not give up easily. He would return with reinforcements or try to set a trap. They had to be ready for anything. That night, under the stars, they counted and secured the gold. It was not the full amount Collins had stolen, but it was enough to change lives. The bride looked at the coins, then at the gunslinger. We did it, she said quietly. Part of it, he replied. Collins is still dangerous. This is only the beginning. Deadwood doesn't forget, and neither does he. The bride nodded, understanding the weight of their actions. She had grown from a woman seeking protection into someone who could face danger with courage and intelligence. The gunslinger had noticed her growth too. She was no longer just a companion, she was a partner in every sense. Over the next few days, they moved cautiously through Deadwood, gathering more information and staying ahead of Collins. Every step required careful observation. Every encounter demanded attention. They learned that Collins had allies in town, men who could strike at any moment if they felt threatened. The streets were alive with secrets, and the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next conflict. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hill overlooking Deadwood, the bride spoke. We need a plan for when he comes back. He will. And we have to be ready. The gunslinger nodded. We'll make one. Careful, deliberate, and without mistakes. Deadwood has tested us already, but we survive by staying sharp. The stars appeared in the sky, shining over the town that never truly slept. Deadwood was a place of danger, greed, and lawlessness. But for the gunslinger and the bride, it had also become a place of opportunity and courage. They had survived bloodshed, betrayal, and fear. Now, they were ready for the next challenge. The night was quiet, but both knew that it would not last. Collins's anger and ambition would not allow him to rest, and the town would witness more conflict soon. The gunslinger and the bride had taken their first step toward controlling the gold, but the journey was far from over. In Deadwood, every decision mattered. Every shadow could hide a threat, and every ally could turn into an enemy. The gunslinger and the bride understood this, and they were prepared to face whatever came next. Together they had survived the bloodbath, and together they would continue to navigate the dangerous streets, the hidden secrets, and the unpredictable people of Deadwood. The creek flowed quietly in the night, carrying the sound of water over stones, a reminder that life moved on even in the most dangerous of places. The gunslinger and the bride sat in silence for a moment, thinking about what they had done and what they had yet to face. They had survived Deadwood once, but the town's lawlessness was far from over. One thing was certain: the stolen gold had changed everything. Deadwood would never be the same, and neither would they. But the gunslinger and the bride were ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together, using courage, intelligence, and determination to survive in a town where survival was the only rule that mattered. The sun rose slowly over Deadwood, casting long shadows across the wooden streets. The town seemed quieter than usual, but both the gunslinger and the bride knew better. Quiet was rarely a good sign in Deadwood. It meant people were watching, waiting, and planning. Collins had not forgotten the events at the creek or the warehouse, and the gunslinger knew this would be the final confrontation. They moved cautiously through the streets, keeping to alleys and shadowed corners. The bride carried a small satchel with some of the gold they had secured, while the gunslinger's hand rested lightly on his gun. Their eyes scanned every doorway, every window. Deadwood had taught them that appearances were often deceptive, and danger could come from anyone. As they neared the old mill on the edge of town, they noticed movement. Figures were gathering near the building. Men Collins had called in as reinforcements. They were heavily armed and ready to defend their leader and the stolen gold. The gunslinger and the bride took cover behind a stack of barrels, planning their approach carefully. "We have to be smart," the gunslinger whispered. "We can't rush in. We need to separate Collins from his men." The bride nodded, her heart pounding. She had never been in a situation like this before, but she trusted the gunslinger and herself. They had survived bloodshed, ambushes, and betrayal, and now they had a plan to end it. As the men argued over the gold and where to move it, the gunslinger stepped into view, his hat casting a shadow over his eyes. "Collins," he called out, voice firm, "this ends today. Leave the gold, and no one else gets hurt." Collins appeared from behind a stack of crates. His face was red with anger, but there was fear in his eyes too. He realized that the gunslinger had the advantage, but he refused to show weakness. "You think you can take what's mine?" he shouted. "I worked for it. It belongs to me." The bride stepped beside the gunslinger. "It doesn't belong to anyone who hurts others to get it," she said. "This town has already seen enough blood because of greed. Stop now before it's too late." Collins hesitated. His men looked uncertain, some of them shifting from foot to foot. The gunslinger's calm confidence and the bride's courage had unsettled them. For the first time, Collins realized he might have underestimated the two strangers who had been following him. Suddenly, a shot rang out from a nearby window. One of Collins's men had panicked, aiming at the gunslinger. The shot missed, but it was enough to start the fight. The gunslinger moved quickly, disarming the man and pushing him aside. The bride ducked behind crates, keeping low and watching the rest of the men carefully. The fight was tense but controlled. The gunslinger used his skill to neutralize threats without unnecessary harm. The bride, despite her fear, moved with precision, helping to block men who tried to escape or attack. Collins tried to flee toward a hidden room where he had more gold, but the gunslinger anticipated his move. "Stop!" the gunslinger shouted. Collins froze, realizing that escape was impossible. The bride stepped forward, holding a small pistol at her side, ready but not threatening unless necessary. Collins knew he had lost. He dropped his weapon, breathing heavily, and glared at the gunslinger. "You may have won this time," he said, voice shaking. "But someone else will come for the gold. You won't hold it forever." The gunslinger shook his head. "Not our concern. Deadwood has had enough violence over gold already." "You made your choice." The bride nodded, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady. "It's over now. Take responsibility for your actions." Collins's men surrendered quietly, realizing that further resistance would only make things worse. The gunslinger and the bride collected the remaining bags of gold, ensuring nothing was left behind. Every coin, every bag, represented not just wealth, but survival. They had faced danger, betrayal, and violence, and they had come out alive. As the sun reached its peak, the streets of Deadwood began to fill with people once more. News of the confrontation spread quickly, and townsfolk emerged cautiously to see what had happened. The gunslinger and the bride stood at the edge of the old mill, watching the reactions of the crowd. Whispers of their bravery spread through Deadwood, and for the first time, people looked at them with respect instead of fear. The bride turned to the gunslinger. "We did it," she said quietly. "The gold is safe, and we survived. Deadwood, maybe it's not as hopeless as I thought." The gunslinger nodded, though his eyes remained watchful. "It's never hopeless, but it's never easy. Deadwood will always test those who live here. We just need to be ready for the next challenge." Over the next few days, they worked quietly to secure the gold in a safe location outside town. The bride learned quickly how to manage the gold, keeping it hidden and protected. The gunslinger continued to watch the streets, aware that even after the confrontation, Deadwood remained unpredictable. During this time, they also helped the townspeople affected by Collins's actions. Some had lost property or money, and others had been caught in the chaos of the fights. The gunslinger and the bride ensured that the gold they recovered could be used to make some small repairs, helping families and merchants recover. Deadwood had seen enough violence, and for once, there was a chance to bring stability. The bride's confidence grew each day. She had started as someone desperate, agreeing to a $1 marriage for protection. Now she had become a partner, capable of facing danger and making decisions that could affect the entire town. The gunslinger noticed this growth and respected her for it. She was no longer just someone he protected. She was someone he relied on. One evening, they sat on a hill overlooking Deadwood, watching the sun set behind the dusty streets. The town had been changed by the events, but there was a sense of cautious peace. People were rebuilding, and the threat of Collins had passed, at least for now. "You've changed a lot," the gunslinger said quietly, breaking the silence. The bride smiled faintly. "I had to. Deadwood doesn't allow anyone to stay weak. And I realized I can survive, and even help others survive." He nodded, understanding her words. "You've proven yourself. Not just to me, but to this town. You're strong, clever, and brave. Don't forget that." The bride looked down at the town below. "I won't. Deadwood has tested us, and we survived. That's something no one can take away." As night fell, the town grew quiet. The streets were safer now, though still filled with shadows and secrets. The gunslinger and the bride had faced the worst of Deadwood, the greed, the violence, and the betrayal, and they had prevailed. The stolen gold was recovered, Collins was defeated, and the town could begin to heal. The gunslinger and the bride prepared to leave Deadwood the next day. Their time in the town had been dangerous and unpredictable, but it had also forged a bond between them. They had faced violence, risk, and uncertainty together, and they had survived. As they rode away, the sun rose behind them, casting long shadows over the town. Deadwood would remember the events, the bloodshed, the courage, and the cleverness of the gunslinger and the bride. Their story would become part of the town's history, a tale of bravery and survival in a place where danger was always close. The bride looked at the gunslinger. "What now?" she asked. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in days. "Now we live. And we take what we learned with us. Deadwood has tried to break us, but it didn't. That's what matters." The town disappeared behind them, the dust settling slowly in the streets. Deadwood would continue to be a place of gold, danger, and lawlessness, but the gunslinger and the bride had survived its worst. They had faced greed, betrayal, and bloodshed, and they had proven that courage, intelligence, and determination could overcome even the most dangerous of places. For the bride, the $1 marriage had led her to a life she never imagined, a life of courage, partnership, and survival. For the gunslinger, it had been another chapter in a life filled with danger, but also one that reminded him that even in the harshest towns, loyalty and bravery could make a difference. As they rode into the horizon, the story of Deadwood's $1 bride and the gunslinger, the stolen gold and the bloodbath that shook the town, would be remembered forever. And though they left the town behind, the lessons they learned and the bond they had forged would stay with them for the rest of their lives.